He told me that I had Lyme disease. I knew nothing about it, really nothing, but I'd heard of it and it sounded legit. And he said that people do recover and there are treatments for it. So it felt like winning the lottery. This Lyme disease diagnosis felt like a gift from the gods. So for about that first year, I was just in this healing bubble on survival mode, just trying to keep going, trying to read as much as I can and learn as much as I can and do everything that my doctor told me to do. But for that first year, I didn't improve at all. So right about somewhere around this mark, I really was getting quite hopeless and really struggling to find that motivation to keep pushing forward and to keep trying and to keep getting well. And then a savior came my way. It sounds strange to call it that, but it was at the time exactly what I needed to keep going. I went in to see my doctor 3 hours away. My husband always drove me, thankfully, because that was definitely too far for me to drive on my own. But I went in to see the doctor, and one thing I hadn't tried was antidepressants because they scared me. I had heard their side effects were really bad, and just overall they just sounded unpleasant. But I was so deeply depressed that I knew that it was time. So I went in and I told him how much I was struggling and that I think I needed antidepressants. I actually didn't even tell him how bad or how low I was because I was ashamed to tell people how often I felt suicidal, but I was, and I knew it was time to get some antidepressants in the chance that they might be able to help me regardless of how bad their side effects were. And during the same visit, we went over a batch of the most recent lab work that have come back, and he went through the results for me, and there was a new development from this. He told me that I had Lyme disease. I knew next to nothing about Lyme disease. I knew nothing about it, really nothing. But I'd heard of it, and it sounded legit. And he said that people do recover and there are treatments for it. So it felt like winning the lottery. This Lyme disease diagnosis felt like a gift from the gods. It was what I needed to keep going. He said it was chronic Lyme disease. What had probably happened is that I'd gotten bit by a tick some time ago and I hadn't noticed. That normally you get this telltale bullseye rash, but not everybody gets it, and I must not have gotten it because he asked me if I'd remembered getting one ever, and no, I had not. So he said, I got it, it was untreated, so now it's turned into this chronic state, this chronic Lyme disease. And the bad news is that the chronic version of it is much harder to treat than the regular version. I don't know, when you catch it quickly, but it is treatable. So I went home and I was over the moon. It was the best news I'd gotten in that entire year. I was so excited. He had recommended a book about chronic Lyme disease. In my head, I remember it being about this thick, and I read the whole book in 2 days, however many hundreds of pages it was. And then I read everything else I could get my hands on, and there were documentaries on it, and I was just so excited by this diagnosis. I took home those antidepressants that he had given me. I filled prescription right when I left his office, but I got home and I'm like, I don't need them. I never ended up taking them because I had hope again. I had something I could tackle. I had something concrete in front of me. So the Lyme disease treatment that he had me on was pretty much everything I'd been doing before, with the addition of some really heavy doses of antibiotics that I took for a couple of months, which made me really sick to the point where I was throwing up some days. The nausea was intense. I felt worse. I felt so much worse, but I didn't care. I really didn't, because feeling worse to me meant that it was working, that I was getting better. I was happy to feel worse in service of getting well. So it kept going until a point where I got really sick and I was barely functioning and I could barely get off the couch and I was throwing up. So the doctor did some more tests, and whatever was happening in my body, he was alarmed and he's like, stop the antibiotics. Because apparently it was too much. And at time it became clear that the typical chronic Lyme disease treatment wasn't helping me. I wasn't getting any better. And eventually we just sort of abandoned it and went back to business as usual, chronic fatigue syndrome, and kept plugging ahead. So I don't know that I ever had Lyme disease. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But I do know that the diagnosis came at a really good time. And if I didn't have it, those 2 months worth of heavy doses of antibiotics, I'm sure were very bad for my body. But the really low depressed state I was in was worse. So I needed this. And oddly, I'm grateful for it. Whether it ended up being my problem, my solution, or not. So my second year with chronic fatigue syndrome, I was also in Canada. This journey of mine ended up spanning a few different countries. More on that later. But the second year, I actually did start to feel a little bit better. By the end of the second year, I just kept going with all the same stuff I was doing, you know, sometimes tweaking the supplements, trying something different, maybe a different medication or whatever. But by the end of the second year, I was starting to feel better. I had found out about this rejuvenation center in Arizona that I was really excited about it. They did a documentary, and in this documentary they showed people healing, completely recovering from all sorts of diseases. And they had this raw food approach to healing, and also fasting, a lot of fasting, or juice fasting, so eating nothing but green vegetable juice. So after watching this documentary and seeing all these people that had gotten healed, I got online and I booked myself into this center. I booked myself a month there. It costs a fortune. It was around $10,000 to stay there for a month. But again, I didn't care. So I got on a plane, I went to Arizona, and I spent a month at the center. And mostly what I did there was fast. I ate raw vegan food for the first couple days when I got there, and again for the last few days before I left. But the 3 weeks in the middle, I ate nothing I consumed nothing but green vegetable juice, and not even very big quantities. It was a rough go, and there's a lot of other detoxing and cleansing and, you know, meditation and a whole bunch of other stuff there that I did. But it was an interesting experience. It felt sort of like what I would picture a hippie commune to be like. You know, it was out in the desert, and it was just all these, you know, hemp-clad people walking around, you know, looking at you and saying namaste. And it was just very natural and simple. You know, there was a greenhouse and naked sunbathing decks so you could soak up the sun, and, you know, meditation temples, and there's a sweat lodge and nightly bonfires, and just very, very interesting, very unique experience. And when I got back, I actually felt worse for a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks. I felt quite a bit worse. I think I was quite depleted from the lack of food for a month. But then I started to feel better. So I think it might have helped me a bit actually going there. Over the years, fasting is one of the things I've noticed that has helped me to boost my health. So it makes sense that that trip there would have helped me out a bit as well. So now I've had 2 years of really cleaning up my diet, doing a ton of cleansing, completely detoxing my home, my body, trying to do little bits of exercise, but it never went well. Exercise was impossible for me. It just always made me crash. It always made me feel so much worse. But I did everything that I could, and trying to just get my mind in the right space and meditating and journaling. And, I started going to counseling, which really helped. Counseling was a game changer for me, just to keep my head in the right place and keep my perspective in the right place and help me to keep going. So by the end of the second year, I was about 50% better, which is a lot. It's a lot, but not enough. It was enough for me to take my focus off of myself and my health for long enough to realize that my marriage was over. I think we'd been drifting apart for a while, and then this illness was just the final nail in the coffin. So we ended up getting divorced. We sold our house, and this meant that I moved back in with my dad into my childhood home. And 50% better was good, and I convinced myself that it was more than it was. And there was a lot of pressure from my job to go back to work. I'd been off at that point for, I think, 18 months or more, closer to 2 years. I'm losing track. So they said, we'll do a gradual return to work. They built this schedule for me. It was only 3 days a week for 4 hours. That's all I had to do. So I thought, I can do that. I can manage that. So I tried, and I think I lasted 2 weeks. I couldn't do it. I was thankfully not sharing an office with anyone at that time, and it was a very small little office, just my chair and my desk, and I would lay down on the top of my desk and lock the door and try and take naps, even just with that 4-hour shift. I was really struggling, and I was rapidly getting worse. It was really, really destroying my health. So I realized that I just needed to quit, that I wasn't going to be able to go back to work anytime soon. I couldn't even handle 3 days a week for 4 hours, never mind full time, which is what that job was, the expectation was going to be. So there I was. I was living at my dad's house in my childhood home. I was divorced. I'd quit my job. I was still chronically ill, and I tried everything under the sun to get better, and this 50% was all that I'd gotten. And I didn't know how to get any better than that. So even though I had regained some of my health and I did have a little bit of my freedom back, I could sometimes go out for coffee with a friend or do different things, maybe go out, go shopping for a little bit or just do things here and there, even though I still was mostly laid out during the day resting. It still wasn't enough for me. I didn't know how I was ever going to work. I didn't think I was ever going to be able to date again. I didn't think anyone would ever want to date me. Why would they? Someone who's chronically ill and living with their dad and unemployed and no hope for things getting better in the future. So once again, I got really depressed, really, really hopeless about my life, and just really in a dark place. And I knew that I had to do something drastic. I didn't know what it was, but in that moment, I had to figure something out. Something had to give. My mother had also passed away in that couple of year time span, so there'd just been a lot of blows to face, and I just needed to pull myself out of this treadmill of misery that I was trapped on. I just needed to find a way to smile again, to live again, to be happy again. Yeah. I did eventually 100% recover. It took a lot of years. And for a lot of years, I just kind of coasted because I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't until many years down the road when I just got so fed up with every day being a struggle that I just really, really buckled down again and tried a new approach towards getting myself well. And that took another couple of years, again, of just really intense work, but it worked that time. And I did eventually fully get my health back. But before I could get to that point, I just needed to be happy again. I needed to inject myself with some, joy, some wanting to live, to remembering what there is to live out there for. And that is a story for my next video. I did do something drastic. I did do something completely radical, and that completely changed my life. And it did involve leaving Canada. And I've actually since never been back to Canada other than to visit. I ended up hopping around the globe a bit, and it's been quite the adventure. So I will talk more about that in my next video, what it was like living with chronic fatigue syndrome in that in-between state of not desperately sick, but also very far away from being well. And thanks for taking the time to listen to my story. And if you too are currently facing some struggles right now, some of your own health challenges or other challenges, just if I could offer up some unsolicited advice, it would just be to keep going, to keep working, to keep doing whatever it is you have to do to keep pushing yourself ahead, because there is so much living waiting for you on the other side of whatever struggle it is that you're in right now. I would not have believed all that was waiting for me. My head would have exploded if you would have tried to tell me the incredible just adventures and joy and bliss that were waiting for me once I got myself well. And it was so worth putting in the work and putting in the effort and trying new things and not giving up until I got there. So if you're struggling, keep going, keep fighting. Let me know how I can help. And I know that you've got this. So until the next video, when I dive into what country I landed in next and what that was like, that's all for today. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe and the little gray notification bell if you want to know when my next video comes up, talking about the rest of my chronic fatigue syndrome recovery story. And I will see you in the next video.